Awesome. All right. So hello and welcome to our webinar on vertical slices, clean architecture, and modular monoliths. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available for 30 days as a private recording, and then we move it to our webinars playlist on the Nimble Pros YouTube channel. If you signed up for the live webinar or signed up for the recording, you will receive a thank you email with all of the links covered in today's presentation, as well as the information to access the recording. We will cover each of these architectural styles today, when to use them, the benefits, the drawbacks, and also some frequently asked questions. In the end, I will show some additional resources where you can learn more. We have some courses that we want to talk to you about as well. So what are we waiting for? Let's go. So fair warning that we have some food references ahead. So when I think about vertical slices, that's where we're going to start. It's vertical slice architecture. I think about cake. And when I think about cake, that's the vertical slice that you see. So I think about how there's many layers in one piece, and it's kind of similar to what we think about with vertical slices themselves. So what are vertical slices? So think of them as their feature-centric approach. We're looking at things in their feature level rather than in their technical separation of concerns. A feature includes everything such as their UI, their logic, their databases. Typically, you'll see them organized in folders with the name of the feature. We have a few examples I like to mention. So in one of them, so Jimmy Bogart is the one who's behind vertical slice architecture, vertical slices. If you do a search in your favorite search engine for vertical slices, Jimmy Bogart's name will appear. This was his thoughts. Contoso University is the demo that he uses, where you can see the different organizations of the different features. So if I bring out my laser pointer, you can see that if you think about a university has students and it has departments and courses, and then it has the instructors to teach those courses. So this is what Contoso University does, is it organizes its code in features. These are what are known as the vertical slices. Now you're probably wondering what goes in a slice. So with vertical slices, and I'm going to zoom in, so don't panic when you're like, oh no, there's a lot of little words. So we're going to look at the instructor slice. So a slice or a feature has everything that's needed for the feature. So in this example, you're going to see that there's the create, there's edit, there's delete, there's details and things like that. The thing that you don't see is that the infrastructure, so this uses Entity Framework, is pulled out into its own separate file, folder. So you've got your instructors controller, you can look at your controllers, your instructors, you can get the details for an instructor, you can create your instructors, delete instructors, things like that happen, but it's all in one folder. This is the instructors folder. So that's what's going on in a vertical slice, is that you have everything grouped together for the most part. I say for the most part because your infrastructure, you may have to separate into other sections. So have your EF separation elsewhere. Now that said, you could have your entity framework configuration and things sorted in different ways and have your feature stuff set together so that the configuration is together and you have it so it's logically grouped by the feature. Now, when I think about vertical slices, the cake is the initial go-to, but the other thing I like to think about is food trucks, because a vertical slice has everything it needs for that particular feature. A food truck is also, it's one of those where, think of food trucks like burger trucks and taco trucks and cake trucks and things like that. A food truck has everything it needs for start to finish. And so you'll see that it's got the ingredients, it's got the cooking tools, and it's got the chef's expertise. Anything that happens for a burger on a burger truck, it's right there. Does the pizza truck need to know anything about the burger stuff? Not necessarily. They can be separated. Vertical slices, you have an independent feature, and that feature has everything there ready to go. So when I think vertical slices and food analogies, this is where I go to, is the food trucks, because it is encapsulated into one feature. Now, when do you use vertical slices? Vertical slices are great for rapid feature development because everything is right there. Smaller teams who aren't familiar with other architectural styles may find this as an easy go-to for a starting point. When there are clear boundaries between your features, that's when you know that you can start working with vertical slices. There has to be that clear boundary between them, though. And when your features are independent of each other, just like our food trucks, the burger truck and the hot dog truck and the cupcake truck are all independent of each other, that's where vertical slices comes into play and really thrives, is because you can do that independent feature development. And that independent feature development includes both the code to make it work, as well as the tests. So you can easily see that everything is working like it should. Now, the benefits of vertical slices. So again, they're quick to deploy. They're easy to maintain. They're easy to look at the code and you can tell what's going on. You can see, oh, this is what's going on feature-wise. I can have that conversation now with the business and say, oh, look at Continental University. We already have our features in place now for getting our courses there. We have the ability to get our students enrolled. We can assign instructors to the courses. You can see all of that because the features are organized in a way that makes sense and is clear. And vertical slices also reduces the risk by having those features isolated. So that's the key point, is that those features are not tied together. They are separated. Now, some drawbacks to know about vertical slices. So with vertical slices, because everything is kept together, there could be some duplication of some common functionalities. And that can be a headache to maintain. There are ways that you can structure your code so that you have it in features, but there's some sharedness to that, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit when we get into our modular monoliths. But for vertical slices, just know that your features are isolated into their feature folders, and you can see code duplication. The other problem point that you may run into with vertical slices is that if the slices need to be integrated between each other, that can get complex. So vertical slices, again, you're going to want to make sure that you use it when it's features that are independent of each other, maybe smaller projects. Now, some other common questions I hear with vertical slices is something like, how do vertical slices help with scalability? Well, with scalability, they allow you to scale the features independently. So because that slice is self-contained, it's got the UI, it's got the logic, it's got the database, you can deploy it and scale it without affecting the rest of the system. So vertical slices can help in that regards. And then the other question I always hear with vertical slices are vertical slices the same as microservices? And the answer is no, they are not the same. So vertical slices and microservices, you're going to see similarities because they're both talking about features and feature-based and feature-focused. Vertical slices, you'll typically see this within a monolithic application, whereas microservices have that true independence. So vertical slices, you can do some scaling and things like that, but at the same time, if you want that granular control, that's where microservices come into play. All right. So that's vertical slices. Clean architecture. You probably hear a lot of clean architecture from us in the Nimble Pros camp because we do a lot with clean architecture, especially our Dallas's clean architecture template. But the food analogy for clean architecture is, think of it like fine dining. And the reason why is because it's very meticulously organized. Clean architecture, remember, has its prescribed layers. So it's got that core, it's got that application layer, it's got the interface adapters layer, it's got the UI or the presentation as well. They're very defined. In a fine dining kitchen, they're very defined sections for very defined tasks. So you might have an area where they're doing prep work. That's like the core in clean architecture. Maybe you have somebody else who's doing cooking. It's similar to possibly the application layer of clean architecture. Maybe we've got some plating going on. We've got some infrastructure in clean architecture. And then some serving in the restaurant would be like the web or presentation layer in clean architecture. So clean architecture, multiple layers. Each layer has a very specific technical detail that it's supposed to be focusing on. There's that separation of concerns. And it's with high quality and flexibility. Now, the example I like to use for this one is eShop on web. You may already be familiar with eShop on web as, hey, that's a Microsoft application that we've used for reference for many years. Yes, yes, we have. And Nimble Pros has been able to take on the maintenance of eShop on web. So check out eShop on web through GitHub, the Nimble Pros repo of eShop on web. But what I want to point out with that for clean architecture is that we have the different layers and they're going to be in their different projects as well. So you've got your core, you've got your infrastructure, you've got your API. So you've got your different layers going on in there. So with clean architecture, remember prescribed layers. It is very much a meticulous organization on the technical side. Whereas again, with vertical slices, that was feature focused. All right, so when do you use clean architecture? If you need to maintain high quality and flexible code, and it needs to be able to scale well, if you're dealing with a complex application that has a lot of interdependent components, or you have an application that needs to evolve and change over time, we're thinking at a complex scale, not at a simple scale. Clean architecture works well with the complex situations. Now, some of the benefits that you see with clean architecture is there's high maintainability, there's that flexibility, there is a clear separation of concerns when it comes to the technical parts. And with clean architecture, they say that it's easier to test and adapt to changing requirements. I get a little wishy-washy with the testing part, and that's just because with vertical slices, you test the feature. With clean architecture, you're going to test in your different layers. You can do testing in both, and I strongly encourage you doing testing in both. All right, so what are the drawbacks to clean architecture? Clean architecture does have a high initial setup and a tight learning curve. So when you're just getting into clean architecture, you might be overwhelmed at all the layers and trying to keep them straight as to what they do and what goes in core versus what goes in the application or the use cases layer, what goes in web, what goes in infrastructure, how should you organize it? There's a lot of questions that come to mind when you look at clean architecture. So that initial setup, that learning curve, it's not as simple as I'm going to create a feature folder and then I'm going to put everything related to that feature in that folder. It's not that simple. So yeah, there's a little more complexity to learning and getting started with clean architecture. And sometimes it's a lot more effort to require, there's more effort required when you're making small changes in clean architecture. Oh, I just want to change this one little thing. It's never one little thing because you have to hit different layers. Now that said, it might make sense for whatever application you're working with. If it's complex enough, then the effort to make those small changes really isn't that bad because you just do it enough that you're used to it. But yes, clean architecture is definitely, when you compare it to something like vertical slices, it's definitely a steep learning curve. Now, I do get some questions about clean architecture as well. And the questions I get with clean architecture are things like, well, clean architecture, can I use this for all types of applications? One of the phrases you'll hear me say often is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And then the other thing is that when you think of everything, if you have a tool and you have a hammer, and you see everything as a nail and that you have to use that hammer everywhere. And you don't want to do that with any architecture type, clean architecture, vertical slices, modular monoliths, or others. Those are not golden hammers. You want to make sure you understand those trade-offs. You want to understand where are their strong points, where are their benefits, where are their drawbacks. Clean architecture does not work for all types of applications. It is best suited for the complex applications that require long-term maintainability and flexibility. If you have a short-lived application, you're doing some demo code in a spike, it might be overkill. It might be too much. It might be way too complex. So keep that in mind. These trade-offs are going to be important when you're trying to choose an architecture of, do you use this one or do you use another one, and why? Another question I get with clean architecture, because clean architecture, one of the features that stands out is how it handles dependencies. So I get the question of, how do you handle dependencies in clean architecture? Well, it uses the dependency inversion principle. So you're writing code to abstractions, and your abstractions and your implementations are separated, and you're using dependency injection to implement the concrete for the abstract. So you have high-level modules do not depend on the low-level details. Or the phrase you also hear me say is that your business logic does not rely on your technical decisions. So regardless of how you choose to store your data, that business logic doesn't change. You just need a ability to save your logic, to save it somewhere. Details usually are not the thing. It's the high level, can you do this part? So again, clean architecture uses dependency inversion principle. So the high level modules do not depend on low level details. Lots of abstractions and then injecting them through dependency injection. All right. So high level vertical slices, features, a little bit more simpler compared to clean architecture. Clean architecture works better with the more complex projects. They both have the ability to be tested. They both have the ability to work in terms of your monolithic environments. It's just that they organize differently with their different trade-offs. So again, vertical slices, features, but clean architecture is more technical layers. Now, modular monoliths. I like modular monoliths because they fit in the middle there. So the food analogy for the modular monoliths is, think of it as like a buffet where different stations have their different cuisines, and think of those stations as modules. When it comes to modular monoliths, I do a talk on modular monoliths, and it's usually an e-commerce theme. But with the modular monolith buffet thing, think of it as you have these different stations, but the food is still prepared in one spot, which is our monolithic application. So modular monolith is still that monolith. That key phrase there is going to be keys to what the drawbacks are. So what's a modular monolith look like? So if we think about an e-commerce application, you're going to have something where ordering and the cart or the basket and the catalog are three different things. The catalog is I want to see what the store is selling. The basket is, all right, I want to go shopping and these are the things I want to buy. And the ordering is, okay, I bought it. Identity would be the case of, hey, I'm an actual user. Let me sign in. Let me save my cart. Let me see my orders. But these are treated as separate modules. So similar to vertical slices in terms of feature organization. But remember with vertical slices that everything for that slice is within the slice. So the UI, the database, it's all within the slice. A modular monolith, you can have a little bit more breathing room because they can share that database. So it's not that independent. If you want more independence with features, that's where vertical slices comes into play. Modular monoliths, there's some sharing going on there. So when do you use modular monoliths? Well, think of them as you have a large integrated system and you need distinct modules. It's a good way to organize your code and look at it and go, okay, I see the features that I need, and I can see how this will work together. If you're thinking of going microservices, where modular monoliths come into play too, because you have to think about, do you really need microservices? Or is it too large? Modular monoliths are usually seen as that stepping stone going towards them. They're good at being able to have that separation by feature, that separation by domain or subdomain or by bounded context in DDD world. So that separation is okay there, but you might not want the overhead of microservices. And so that's where modular monoliths come into play. You can still scale some of their parts, but not be fully distributed. It depends on how you develop your application. So again, with modular monoliths, they still have that modularity similar to vertical slices, other than it's not fully encapsulated like vertical slices. But modular monoliths are easier to manage and they're easier to deploy than, say, a microservices architecture, but they serve as a stepping stone for that. With modular monoliths, they promote reusability and separation, but you're still within that monolithic application. And we have a talk where we do the whole discussion of how do you go from a legacy monolith towards microservices. And I'll be doing that talk here shortly in a couple weeks at a conference. But what I focus on with that is that you can go from a legacy code monolith, so really gross, tightly coupled code, toward microservices, maybe stopping at the modular monolith by taking steps using a process called event storming, so talking it through. That modular monolith, that whole modularity part is what makes that transition seem a lot easier. So going from legacy code, not really well organized, to, okay, now we have feature folders at least. We understand how our microservices could be organized. The modular monolith just gives you that wiggle room to see, are these the right groupings? And then with microservices, then you're all in. The drawbacks to modular monolith, though, are you still have monolithic issues. So scaling and deployment, you can do some scaling and some deployment with multiple pieces in your CI/CD if you really want to, but you still are deploying a monolith. And so you still have some tweaking that you can do and some that you cannot. You don't have that granularity like microservices does. And it's easy to get into the wrong situation if you're trying to do distributed applications with monolith. You'll hear somebody, I think it's my friend Jay Tower, who talks about the distributed monolith, where you have these different pieces, parts, and then it gets all tightly coupled and gross and trying to communicate with each other. So you have to be careful when you're making a modular monolith. You want to make sure that things are interacting with each other in a way that they're not causing trouble and not getting tightly coupled and not causing performance issues. Now, when it comes to modular monoliths, the questions I usually get with that are things like, well, can a modular monolith evolve into microservices? Yes, that's something that we strongly encourage because you don't really want to go greenfield microservices. You are probably evolving from something like a legacy monolith. So, yes. And then the other question I usually get are, what are the challenges of using a modular monolith? So with modular monoliths, some of the issues we run into are things like, how do you determine whether you have the right boundaries for your modules? And you'll have that same question with vertical slices. How do you know where your features end? And part of it is you will recognize features because you can understand their high-level class of, okay, this is definitely instructors, this is definitely students, this is definitely courses. But what happens when you get some gray area? As we do with any other architectural style, we have to have conversations and understand the context for how our models are being used. Those will help us to determine whether we have popular modular, the proper modular boundaries, or if we need to reset those boundaries. Having those conversations also help us to figure out whether we want to go vertical slices versus modular monolith. It's one of those where you have to figure out, what are you trying to do with your application? What do you need to do in terms of deploying it? What do you need to do in terms of maintaining it? What kind of developers you have that are maintaining it? What do they understand with this architectural decision? Another challenge you'll see with modular monoliths are managing the dependencies between modules and trying to avoid that big ball of mud anti-pattern where things become tightly coupled. Yeah, also trying to avoid the distributed monolith where you're like, I'm going to put pieces here and pieces here, but they're all distributed in different spots and still are tightly coupled and not communicating well. All right, we have a bunch more questions that I want to show. So in summary, with these three particular architectures, quick, how do you remember vertical slices? The way I think about it is you want quick, independent feature delivery. If you feature in one slice, so think of it as slices a folder, and then that feature includes your UI, it includes your database, and it includes the logic. Everything is in that slice. That's where vertical slices is strong. The next is clean architecture. So when do you use clean architecture? The quick go-to on that is think of it as it's ideal for the complex, evolving applications that need the high flexibility. And for modular monoliths, think of those as providing the structure and scalability within a monolithic system. All right, I want to stop sharing a minute and see how you all are doing. Any questions so far? Okay. Sounds like it's pretty quiet, so just want to show you our eShop on web. So pull that over and we'll share that. Share. Okay. So you should see eShop on web. And the reason why I want to call out eShop on web is so you can see what the clean architecture reference application looks like. And so we use this for the clean architecture one because it makes sense. If we go into our sources, you can see our different layers. Now, when we go with clean architecture, just so you can understand what goes on in there, we're doing this specifically with the ability to grow a complex application. So when we're thinking about eShop, we're thinking about e-commerce. It's not simple CRUD. It really is not a simple create, read, update, delete kind of situation. Especially once you get into, okay, we've got the products, we've got our catalog, we've got our basket, we've got our order. Now when we want to get into the analytics of it, okay, that adds another degree of complexity. So we can see all of that here. But with eShop on web, again, I want to point out that there's the different projects are separated. So your architectural decision, whether you're doing vertical slices or you're doing clean architecture or you're doing modular monolith, your organization and your code is going to rely on you. There are templates like this one where we use projects to separate the different layers. But you might find that projects get to be a bit too much. You may just have a simple web application with the features folder. We have a course that we just recently released to early access about clean architecture. And we have a code along in there where we go from clean architecture towards vertical slices. So what does that look like, taking it from the technical and flipping it into feature-based? And so we walk through going towards it. We don't go fully vertical slices because we don't encapsulate your UI and database in there, but we show how do you take steps to refactor to go towards there. Because sometimes you might start an application and you choose the application because you have an idea in mind, but then you realize you missed something. And so you're like, you know what, I'm going to use Ardalis's clean architecture template because I have it installed. It's easy to get started with. I'm going to go ahead and run it. And then you create your application and realize, this is too much. It's overkill. How do I refactor it back out? Sometimes it's easier to start from scratch, but sometimes not so much. So yeah, with ESSHP on web, the reason why I want to show you this is because this is the example we use for clean architecture. Now, our friend Jimmy Bogart is the one who did Contoso University, and you see it as contosouniversity.net core. And even though it shows those dates, there is still a tutorial out there today, and I've gone through it, and it takes the MVC approach toward using features. So if we go into our Contoso University, notice a scalable tests and the application. I can't stress this enough. Make use of tests, regardless of what your architectural decision is. Let the tests help you ensure that your code is doing the right thing. Now, with the Contoso University, here's that features folder that we were talking about for vertical slices. Notice I called out infrastructure was separate, just so you can see. Now, he also has his models, and so his models he kept separate. But sometimes if they need to just be isolated to that particular feature, then I would put the model with the feature instead. And so, and here you can see this is what that screenshot came from, where we looked at the courses and the departments and the instructors, and we looked at instructors. But I mean, departments is going to be very similar, where you have your create, your delete, your edit, your details. Again, there is some sharing in this particular demo, but typically you're going to see something where you have your UI and you have your database all encapsulated in there. So that's the demo for when you're dealing with vertical slices. Now, when it comes to modular monoliths, there's a demo out there that Ardalis uses for his modular monoliths course. And so I don't have that here because that's part of his course, but it is an e-commerce solution. And so that's where you see something very similar. And you're going to see that with a lot of examples where it could be a bookstore, it could be a shopping place of any type, really. There's that underlying recipe of what goes on in there. Okay, let me make sure we're good in chat. So do I have any vertical slices solutions that you can share? Or any, sorry, VS and VS today, vertical slices and Visual Studio. Do I have a Visual Studio solution I can share about vertical slicing? So this is the one that I recommend is Jimmy's Contoso University. And when I send out the thank you email, I'll include a link to the tutorial that walks through so you can see how they walk through creating those features. Currently, I am in the process of looking at what else is out there example-wise, because I think it's time, especially seeing dates like 7 years ago. I have not played with vertical slicing in Visual Studio in a while, just because I've been on complex projects. But I also would be curious to see what's out there in terms of vertical slicing. So Victor, I will take a look at this after the webinar to see if there are any newer templates out there for vertical slicing. But this is the template and the walkthrough that I've seen. I personally want to create another version of this where it's modern technologies. So away from MVC, using our API endpoints and things like that. All right, let's go back to our slides. Go back to my Zoom, make sure you all are seeing that. Okay. So let's talk about the frequently asked questions that I see in general. So one of the questions I always go back on testing, and because I always get the question of how do these architectural decisions impact testing? And the thing is, the architectural decision impacts how your code is organized. So it impacts how you access your code. But in terms of impacting testing, your code is still going to be testable. Vertical slices allows that end-to-end feature testing because, again, that feature entirely is in that slice. With clean architecture, it's easy with the unit and integration testing because you've got that separation of technical concerns. And modular monoliths, again, make it easier for testing because of their modules. You can test just that module to ensure that it's doing what it needs to. Now, if you have the modules where they have to interact with each other, you can also write tests around that as well. Write tests around all the things. So there's a question about, in a modular monolith, can various modules and features share common areas like infrastructure? There is a chance of sharing with a modular monolith. Again, you're in a monolithic setup, so that is quite possible where they have a shared database, where they have the shared infrastructure, things like that. It's there. There's still that separation by feature, but again, you'll see the underlining technical may be shared. So yes, Satiris, that can happen. Something else you'll see are when you're working in like vertical slices or clean architecture or modular monoliths, what technologies will you see? Mediator. Mediator is key. I can't stress mediator enough. I see it in vertical slices. I see it in clean architecture. I see it in modular monoliths. How are things talking to each other? Mediator, the mediator pattern, and Jimmy's mediator makes life easy for that. You can go deeper and you can get into messaging and queues and things like that. With clean architecture, that whole complexity thing, that's where you get into that. But yeah, mediator is the one I see with all of these. Now, I have to point out this because I recently released a clean architecture course into early access, and we'll include a link to that in our thank you notes. You can get it for early access today with 60% off through the end of this month. So rest assured, I'll get you access to this. But this question always comes up and I have to shake my head. Can you combine vertical slices with clean architecture? Just because you could doesn't mean you should. Clean architecture, if you want to organize your code in the different layers by features and have feature folders, that's okay. But I wouldn't try to mix vertical slices and clean architecture too much. Just because clean architecture's got a complexity to it, vertical slices has a simplicity to it, and that complexity can really kill the simplicity in vertical slices. So I've had people go, but you know that vertical slice? I could put clean architecture and scaffold it within the slice. And when I recorded the course, I'm just like, no, don't try this in production. Don't do this. Do not put clean architecture layers within your vertical slices because that's going to overcomplicate it. Do you really need that layer of complexity? Probably not. All right. Let's talk about a couple other resources that we have out there for modular monoliths and clean architecture. So modular monoliths, we go into them in detail. We have a modular monolith webinar that's out there, but Ardalis also has a couple courses on Dome Train for those as well. So you'll be able to see those. And then clean architecture. So clean architecture, we have done a webinar on clean architecture with .NET 6, a webinar with clean architecture with .NET 8. We've done a clean architecture presentation at conferences. You'll see that go through. And again, this is the early access one. So clean architecture, we're using Ardalis's template. I get into a lot of detail with this template. And so we take a look and see what goes on in each of the layers. What are the technical decisions that we made? Why did we make those decisions? And you're going to take a look and see how we go even further to, okay, I can work with the template, but how do I get rid of all this stuff and actually just bring in my code? So I talk about all of that in this course. We go into the fundamentals of clean architecture and the guiding principles, and then we compare clean architecture to things like hexagonal architecture. And we look at it versus microservices, and we look at it versus vertical slices. And then we refactor clean architecture. We'll use the clean architecture template to refactor it into vertical slices. So you can see how different those are. You can see the simplicity versus the complexity. You can understand why you would choose one versus the other, depending on your situation. That's another thing I guess I really need to point out is that there are times where a developer, especially one who's inexperienced with the whole architectural thing, they hear the complexity. They hear complex and they think that it's painful and that it's just something that makes things really hard. Complexity doesn't always have to be technical complexity. It can be business logic complexity. And so just because you hear complex, don't think, oh God, complex means awful. Complex just happens to be the nature of something. It's not, it doesn't make it good or bad. It is what it is. Clean architecture, that's where it comes into play. That's where it thrives, is on the complex. So, all right. So Victor has questions on, do I include identity, exception handling, and logging in the course? So we mentioned the logging decision at a high level. We don't get into any depth of that because, again, the focus is on clean architecture and not onto the logging part. Identity does not get covered. And again, it's just because that wasn't the focus of the course. I know. It sounds like we have a bunch of, I've had a few other people reach out going, hey, can you talk more about identity? And funny you mentioned it, I do have a conference talk coming up here in a few weeks where I talk about passwordless development in Azure. And we talk about managed identities and we talk about credentials and we talk about a lot of stuff identity related. So yeah, all right, Victor, I'm going to turn the question on you because you asked about identity. If we had identity in that clean architecture course, what would be the thing that you would look to see? Are you just looking to see how it incorporates in the various layers? You want to see it? Okay. You want to see how that identity ties in with the various layers, and you want to see probably testing of that too, I suspect. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that was not initially on the roadmap, but it's one of those, it's good to get that feedback that you want to see more with identity in there as well. Exception handling, I think we cover that as part of our templates. So if it's not in that one, it's going to be in one of the two newer code alongs. So the course is going to have a lot of code alongs in there. And the code alongs are because the way I like to show these things is get your hands dirty and play with the code and learn how to work with it and learn its quirks. So that's why I'm going to have other code alongs that are not ready in early access yet, but will be ready before the end of the month. And that's going to be one showing you how you can add features from the outside in. So you're like, oh, you know what? I can see the UI. I can see how I want this to flow. What does that look like? And then the other is, okay, I've got business logic. And now how do I expand that out and add it to my UI? So we'll take an outside in approach and an inside out approach. So those are two more code alongs that are coming. They're not ready yet. They will be ready though by the end of this month. So what UI framework will be used? Right now, the only application that's in there is an API. And so we're just using minimal APIs. But we're not getting into UIs too much, again, because we don't want to take the focus off of clean architecture. So if there is a simple UI, we'll make sure that it's a UI framework that makes sense for everybody. So yeah, and like I said, it's in early access now. This early access code can be used. First 200 people who see it and use it, and then it's got to be used before August 1st of 2024. Because after that, the course should be live. And so you'll have all the access to these. But 60% off today, early access code. That bit.ly link will be included in the thank you email. I will include both the bit.ly link. So we have a bit.ly link for the site, and then we have one that actually includes the promo code. Because you subscribe, because you're interested in our webinar, I want to make it easier for you to be able to get that discount. So we'll include that in there. All right. Modular monoliths, if you want to learn more about those, can't recommend these enough. Steve or Ardalis, he has these two courses right now out in Dome Train. You can get them individually. You can get them on the bundle. I'm going to recommend get the bundle because the bundle is just a better deal. But that way you can learn about modular monoliths getting started and then deep diving into them. Now, Nimble Pros, some of us are actually going to be out and about. So we're heading out to DevOp conference, which is happening August 14th to the 16th in St. Charles, Missouri, which is near St. Louis. I will be there. I have a 4-hour workshop I will be doing on event storming. So if you want to learn more about how you can communicate with the business and how you can understand each other better and how you can flesh your requirements out better and maybe start understanding your bounded context in the DDD realm kind of deal. That's what that workshop does. I have a presentation for securing your credentials for Azure app development. So going into the identity space. So Azure Identity, Azure SDK. And that talk I do is not just C#. We can also talk about it for JavaScript and TypeScript and Java. And so we talk about there's a walkthrough called how to access Key Vault using default Azure credential. So we'll talk about what is default Azure credential, but then we get down into, okay, what are the other credentials out there? And how do you get the fine-grained control over those? Love doing that talk, so you'll see that one there. If you want to learn more about legacy monoliths going toward microservices with more modular monolith talks, this is that talk that I'm talking about at devop. That's going to be on the Thursdays, from legacy monolith towards microservices via event storming. And my colleague Cameron is going to be talking about clean code with clean architecture. So if you want to learn about clean architecture or modular monoliths and happen to be in the St. Louis, Missouri area, check out DevOps Conference, August 14th to the 16th. We will be there in person. I am so excited to see the community again. And then in terms of webinars and the upcoming topics, because I recognize some of you as regulars, this is what's coming up. So we have next month, I'll be talking about OpenTelemetry with Grafana and .NET Aspire. So we'll talk about how you can work with a dashboard for that. And I'm hoping to have the logging part sorted out as well, so I can show you how you can add more using .NET Aspire. On September 25th, I am going to do a webinar about growing your coding career, specifically focusing on coding and how can you be a better coder and how can you learn the tips and tricks, because these webinars, they're only about a half hour to an hour long. It's only a short period of time. How do you learn more? So I'm going to talk about that how do you learn and how do you grow in code? That's exactly what's going on. September 25th. In October, we're getting down to the scary, the spooky, the anti-patterns. Nobody wants to see anti-patterns. They're what make us cry. They keep us up at night. But I'm going to show you how we can refactor them and make them less scary. And then in November, we usually see that .NET release. .NET 9 is probably going to be out the door by that point. And that means updates to the clean architecture template for Ardalis's clean architecture template. So I will have a webinar showing that as well. And then if you need any help implementing things like domain-driven design or CI/CD, if you're looking for mentoring for your developer teams, give us a call, contact us. Scan the QR code. The QR code will take you to our contact page. Reach out. I assure you there are humans on the other side, Steve and Michelle and Eric, myself, all sorts of us who get involved throughout the process. Reach out and let us know how we can help. Again, thank you for coming today. And once this recording is made available for us in Zoom, I will send out the thank you email, which includes links to all of the different things that we saw today in terms of vertical slices. So including things like the demo. And then also for clean architecture, we'll include links to the demo. We'll include links to the courses, including that early access 60% off. With Modular Monoliths, we'll also include links to the courses there as well, both the individual courses and the bundle. And then if you have any other questions, those thank you emails, they get sent with my email address. So if you reply, I assure you there's a human on the other side who can answer those questions for you. Thank you for attending today.